"Dad, I think it's better if you leave." Those were my daughter Emily's words, sharp, clear, and louder than the church bells ringing in the distance. For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. The scent of roses, candles, and champagne filled the hall, but all I could feel was the heaviness in my chest, as if someone had dropped a stone into it. A father's final gift, $1 and a lifetime of regret. I had come early, in my best charcoal suit, holding the small silver box I intended to place in Emily's hands after the ceremony. Inside was something precious, something tied to our family for generations. But instead of a smile, she looked at me with cold eyes, her hand resting on her new husband's arm, as if to remind me where her loyalty now lay. Around us, guests whispered, pretending not to notice. I felt the sting in my throat, but managed only one reply. "Is that truly what you want, Emily?" Her silence answered louder than any words, and so I turned and left. But what I left behind at that wedding was far greater than my absence. When I stepped out of that wedding hall, the night air felt heavy and damp. The faint perfume of gardenias from the courtyard mixed with exhaust from idling limousines. Yet my mind didn't rest in that moment. It wandered unwillingly backwards. You see, betrayals like this don't happen in one night. They grow like mold, spreading quietly behind walls until the day the rot bursts through the paint. I wasn't always this old man in a suit, being cast out of his daughter's celebration. I was once a husband, a provider, and the father Emily once clung to when she had nightmares. Her tiny fingers would squeeze mine so tightly, as if letting go would shatter her world. And to be honest, she was my world. My wife, Margaret, and I didn't live grandly, but we lived honestly. I worked as an electrician, steady shifts, long hours. My hands were calloused from years of twisting wires, and on many mornings my clothes smelled of copper and insulation. Still, when I walked through the door each evening, Emily would run toward me with bare feet slapping against the wooden floors. Margaret was softer than me. Where I was stern, she was patient. Where I worried about the bills, she'd remind me of blessings, a warm house, family dinners, the laughter of a child. She used to say, "Money comes and goes, but respect is forever." I admit, I never thought our own daughter would be the one to forget that. Emily had ambition from a very young age. She wasn't the type to settle for small-town life. While other kids were satisfied with summer fairs and football matches, Emily had her eyes glued to glossy magazines and television shows. She'd point at the brides in lace gowns on TV and whisper, "One day, Daddy, I'll have a wedding bigger than this." I'd laugh, pat her head, and say, "As big as you want, sweetheart. Just don't forget who's walking you down the aisle." She was bright. Too bright, maybe. Teachers admired her, neighbors envied her. But there was always a hint of pride in the way she corrected even me. When she reached her teenage years, the distance began. She didn't want cheap sneakers anymore, but designer heels. She didn't want my old pickup driving her to school. It embarrassed her. I told myself it was normal for a girl to grow, to want more. I thought if I worked a little harder, picked up an extra shift, I could make her dreams easier. Life wasn't soft on us. Margaret fell ill when Emily was in her early 20s. Long hospital nights, endless medical bills. I tried everything, from cashing my retirement bonds early to selling the land my father left me. But cancer devours more than the body. It eats through savings, through hope. Emily stayed detached at first. She said hospitals scared her. Still, I urged her to spend more time with her mother. I'll never forget Margaret's request on one of her last weaker days. She whispered to me, "Promise me she'll be taken care of, even when I'm gone." Promise me, Tom? I did promise, and I meant it. When Margaret passed, the house fell silent. I'd listen to the clock tick, smell her perfume lingering in her dresser, and wonder if I'd failed her. But Emily moved forward quickly, almost too quickly. She started seeing Charles, the man who eventually called himself my son-in-law. Charles was the type of man who looked polished on the outside, sharp suits, expensive watches, that confident smirk that could belong to a lawyer or a salesman. He worked in finance, a line of work I never fully understood, but he made sure everyone knew he handled big deals. He was polite around me, yes, but in that dismissive way young men can be, answering politely but never listening. Over dinners, I noticed small changes. Emily, once outspoken, suddenly parroted his views. He'd say, "Old houses aren't worth much these days," and Emily would soon lecture me about liquidating assets. I'd bring up her mother's jewelry, the heirlooms passed down, and she'd comment, "It's outdated, Dad. Maybe I'll sell it one day." These were not just casual remarks, they were seeds. Seeds Charles planted carefully. When Margaret died, she left a modest will. I made sure Emily inherited the jewelry, certain bonds, and some savings. I kept the house, partly because I couldn't bear to leave it, partly because it carried memories thicker than those bricks. Emily seemed impatient with it all. "Dad, you should move into an assisted community. Sell this old place. You'll be alone here," she'd insist. Her tone always carried more urgency when Charles was nearby. But I couldn't. Every creak of the floors reminded me of Margaret humming in the kitchen, of Emily's early footsteps, of a life I was terrified to admit had slipped through my fingers. The house was more than property. It was my anchor. Then came the wedding. At first, Emily didn't even tell me she was engaged. I heard through a neighbor who spotted the announcement online. When I confronted her, she brushed it off. "Dad, we didn't want to burden you. Weddings are expensive." Burden me? I was her father. Walking her down the aisle wasn't a burden. It was a privilege I'd been waiting for since she was a child in plastic tiaras. But I swallowed it. For peace. For her. I offered to pay for part of the wedding. She refused, saying Charles's family had it covered. Still, I put away a little box, silver polished, passed down to me from my grandfather. Inside, I carefully folded Margaret's locket, the same she wore on our own wedding day. I thought, if Emily has forgotten her roots, maybe this gift will remind her. That silver box was the only thing I carried with me when I walked into that church. I stood among rows of relatives, some distant, some unknown. I smiled when I caught glimpses of traditions intertwined with extravagance. The booming organ, candles crackling faintly, the smell of roses spread across the hall. Yet, when Emily spotted me, dressed simply in my charcoal suit, her face hardened, not softened. And that was when she said those cold words. "Dad, I think it's better if you leave. But why did my daughter cast me out on the biggest day of her life?" The answer wasn't just pride, it was something far more painful. I replayed that moment in my head 100 times. Emily, in her white gown, lace shimmering under chandeliers, looking at me, not with love, not even with tolerance, but with the kind of eyes strangers reserve for trespassers. It wasn't just the words, "Dad, I think it's better if you leave." It was the weight behind them. That wasn't my daughter speaking. That was someone else. A woman coached, hardened, reshaped further from me. With every year Charles stood at her side. And the worst part? Everyone saw it. As she waved for an usher to guide me out, I felt dozens of eyes following me. Cousins whispering, aunts raising brows, old church friends clutching their pearls in sympathy. My departure interrupted the ceremony more than my presence ever would have. The organ quieted briefly, like even the music paused to watch my humiliation. "Is that her father?" I caught someone mutter behind me. "Why is he leaving?" a guest whispered. Another voice, smug, replied, "Probably couldn't afford his place here." Those words stung worse than Emily's dismissal. Why was it easy for strangers to invent excuses, yet impossible for my own flesh and blood to defend me? I stopped just outside the arched doors, the chatter muffled by heavy oak. My hands trembled around the silver box I'd carried. For a fleeting second, I thought about walking back inside, marching down the aisle, and declaring my place beside her as her father. But then I remembered how she'd looked at me, not tearful, not conflicted, but firm. And then, as if fate wanted the knife, twisted deeper, I overheard Charles's voice, calm, dripping in false sympathy, carry through a crack in the door. "She didn't really want him here, Julia. We only invited him to avoid drama," he told one of his sisters, who gave a laugh far too shrill for a holy place. Emily's soft voice followed, "I just couldn't risk him embarrassing me. He dresses so plain, and he still clings to Mom's old things. He doesn't fit with the life Charles and I are building." Those words I will never forget. As I stood there in shock, I couldn't help thinking of Margaret. If she had been alive that day, she would have stood proudly in the front row, clapping through tears, squeezing my hand when Emily walked down the aisle. She would never have let our daughter erase us like that. But Margaret wasn't there. Only I was. And in that moment, Emily chose to erase me anyway. I didn't storm back inside. Dignity wouldn't let me. Instead, I waited in the courtyard. The fountain bubbled faintly, the smell of wet stone filling the air. I sat on a bench, gripping that silver box, waiting for the ceremony to end. When the guests spilled out hours later, drunk on music and champagne, Emily approached with Charles at her side. She didn't look guilty, not even conflicted. She looked irritated. "Dad," she sighed, as if my presence itself was inconvenient. "I told you to leave earlier." "Emily," I said slowly, each word heavy with the effort of staying calm. "All I wanted was to give you something your mother left for you." I placed the silver box in her hands. She didn't even open it. Charles smirked, sliding his arm around her waist. "We appreciate the thought, sir, but Emily and I want to create new traditions. We aren't really tied to old relics." Relics. That's what he called the locket Margaret kept close to her heart for 30 years. Emily leaned against him, nodding. "Yes, Dad, I hope you understand." Understand? No, I didn't. A man can understand bills, sickness, even death. But the deliberate removal of a father from his only child's life, that I could not understand. I followed them quietly to the reception hall, naive enough to think perhaps I would still be part of the evening. But when I approached the entrance, 2 men in black suits blocked my way. "Sir, your name isn't on the seating list." I frowned. "I'm her father. I don't need a seat. I just wish to stand for her first dance." They shook their heads. "We have instructions." And then I saw them inside. Charles's family seated at the front, glasses raised high. Emily clutched his hand, laughing, lost in her new world. On the edge of the dance floor, the silver box I had given her sat abandoned on a table, not only unopened, but forgotten. That moment was the deepest cut. It wasn't rejection, it was erasure. I left that hall walking slower than I ever had. My mind kept repeating, how did it come to this? I had given her everything. I had sold my own comfort to pay hospital bills. I had worked nights, weekends, holidays. I had gone without, so she wouldn't. And now, on the day that should have been the brightest of both our lives, she looked at me as if I were already dead. The betrayal wasn't just being asked to leave. It wasn't even just the whispers of strangers. It wasn't Charles's smug interference. It was the cruel truth that my daughter, the girl who once clutched my hand in the dark, now saw me as a burden, a problem to hide, something to cut out of photographs. I walked home through the quiet streets, the faint taste of champagne and roses still clinging in the air, though I had touched neither. That night, I sat in my empty house, Margaret's smile framed on the mantel. I looked straight into her eyes across the room and said aloud, I kept my promise to take care of her, Maggie. But tell me, who will take care of me when she has cast me aside? The clock ticked on, mocking my silence. And in that silence, a new thought was born. Quiet at first, but growing stronger with each tick. If Emily and Charles believed they could erase me from their lives, perhaps I'd leave them a gift that would make me unforgettable. This wasn't about anger or violence, but about something far subtler, far smarter. After all, I still had one thing Charles and Emily did not: complete control over my legacy. Nights after the wedding stretched endlessly, like strings pulled taut, ready to snap. The house, once filled with Margaret's humming and Emily's laughter, had grown into an echo chamber of absence. I would sit by the fireplace some evenings, turning Margaret's locket in my hands. The thought that Emily hadn't even opened the silver box, hadn't even bothered to glance inside, made my chest tighten in ways no doctor could diagnose. I wasn't angry in the way young men are angry, shouting, storming. Number. My anger was quieter, sharper. It was the kind that builds behind calm eyes, the kind that has nowhere to go but inward, until the right moment comes to let it seep outward like smoke. And I knew in my bones that moment would come. Before you think me too vengeful, let me tell you, I tried. I truly did. A week after the wedding, I called Emily. My thumb hovered over the call button, longer than I'd like to admit. When she answered, her voice was flat, as though she'd predicted I would not let things go. Dad, she began, almost before I could greet her, if this is about the wedding— It isn't, I interrupted. though of course it was. I just wanted to talk, maybe have lunch, just us. No ceremonies, no misunderstandings. There was silence. I could hear Charles in the background, muttering something. Then Emily replied, "I don't think that's a good idea right now. We're busy settling into married life." "I only ask for an hour," I said softly. "Just 1 hour, Emily. Perhaps." There was a trace of guilt because she agreed, reluctantly. We met at a cafe downtown, a sleek place filled with polished marble tables and the scent of roasted beans far too expensive for my taste. Emily entered in a smart cream dress, her phone in hand, and kissed my cheek in a way that felt more like duty than affection. "How are you, Dad?" she asked, already distracted by a buzzing notification. "I'm surviving," I admitted. "And you? Happy?" "Yes," she said brightly, though her eyes flickered when she mentioned Charles's name. "But Dad, we need to talk about something." Her fork tapped nervously against her plate, a quick metallic rhythm. "About your will." I clenched my jaw but kept my voice calm. "My will?" "Yes, I mean, you're not getting any younger," she said, flashing that rehearsed smile. "Charles thinks it would make sense to put things in order now. The house, your savings, even the retirement account. Just so everything is clear." The way she said "Charles thinks" instead of "I think" confirmed my growing suspicion. It wasn't Emily's concern. It was his greed, echoing through her voice. My fingers tightened on my cup. Steam rose, fogging my glasses slightly. I wiped them slowly, using those few seconds to calm the storm swelling in my chest. "You mean Charles thinks I should secure the house and savings in your name already?" I asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "It would be simpler, cleaner, that way when the time comes." "The time?" I cut sharply. "Emily, you speak as though I've already got a foot in the grave." "It's not like that," she rushed, cheeks flushing pink. "It's just practical." I leaned back, studying her face. There were traces of Margaret there, the curve of her brow, the way her hair fell slightly over her cheek when she tilted her head. But her tone, her angle of eyes when watching me, belonged entirely to him. I excused myself shortly after. There was no shouting, no dramatic exit. Only a realization, heavy as lead, solidifying inside me. My daughter was not merely drifting away from me. She was being pulled, guided, by a man who valued me only for what I could give. As if to confirm it, Charles paid me a visit 2 weeks later. He arrived in a sleek black car that hummed like a predator. When I opened my front door, the faint smell of his cologne preceded him. Overbearing, musky, too sharp for my simple living room. "Mr. Hayes," he greeted smoothly, as though I were a business acquaintance, not family. I thought I'd stop by, have a little man-to-man talk. I gestured for him to sit, though every part of me resisted. He looked around my home with casual disdain, eyes scanning the furniture, the mantel, the old grandfather clock. "You've kept things traditional," he noted, the word dripping with mockery. "They've lasted longer than fashion ever will," I replied. He smiled faintly, showing teeth but no warmth. "All the more reason to pass them along properly. Emily deserves security, Mr. Hayes. You've done well for yourself. The house, whatever's in your accounts. Why let probate and taxes mess it all up later? Best to name her directly now, while everything's simpler." There it was. No hesitation, no softness. Just greed packaged as practicality. I poured him a cup of tea, set it before him without sugar. He didn't notice the bitterness rising in me as he drank. "Mr. Hayes," he repeated, leaning forward, "surely you love Emily enough to ease her future." I locked eyes with him. "Charles," I said evenly, "loving Emily has never been the problem, but trusting you might be." His expression flickered, momentary annoyance disguised quickly as charm. "I only want the best for her." As he left, his polished shoes clicking against my wooden floor, a thought bloomed fully formed in my mind. If Charles believed he could bend me so easily, then perhaps it was time to remind both of them, that the old electrician still had some wires left to twist. That night, I sat at my desk, pulling out Margaret's old blue folder, the one where we kept house papers, savings bonds, and a draft of my current will. I read every page under the dim light of the lamp. They thought I'd surrender everything quietly. that I'd hand over my legacy like a tired man giving away spare change. But they forgot one thing. I still had time. And with time comes power. Power to arrange things in silence. Power to give without giving. Power to shape consequences like a sculptor with clay. I began making calls to an old friend, Howard, who'd worked as a lawyer in town for 40 years, to my bank, confirming the options on trusts and annuities, to a cousin Emily barely remembered, who lived states away. I spoke slowly, carefully, each word shaped not by haste, but with the patience of a man who knew revenge didn't need fists or fury. It needed planning. Still, part of me hoped Emily would turn back, that my little girl, beneath Charles's shadow, might find her voice again. I tried inviting her home one last time. I cooked her favorite, roast chicken with rosemary, the scent filling the kitchen just as it had when she was small. She came, yes, but only after Charles finished late at work. She stepped into the house, glanced around, and frowned. "Dad, you should really consider redecorating. It feels so old." I smiled bitterly. "Old, maybe. But it's our history, Emily." Her eyes softened only for a moment when she saw Margaret's photograph still on the mantel. But the moment passed quickly. She sighed, muttered something about being tired, and left before dessert was done. I ate alone that night, the rosemary clinging stubbornly to my clothes. That was when I knew. There was no return. The bridge between father and daughter had already burned. So I sat in the same living room where Margaret had once laughed freely, and I drafted my decision. I would not yell, I would not curse, I would not soil myself in the mud bath of revenge through aggression. Instead, I would do what men like Charles never expected. Act intelligently, legally, with unshakable patience. If Emily wished to erase me, so be it. But she would discover, too late, that erasure comes at a cost. And that silver box she discarded so easily, that was only the beginning of what I still had planned. A single document in a lawyer's office would become my first quiet victory. They thought they inherited my silence, but they were about to inherit something much larger. The truth about revenge is this. It isn't loud. It doesn't travel on footsteps or shouts. It's quiet. So quiet, in fact, that the very people it's meant for go on laughing, celebrating, certain they've won. And then one day, when the floor gives way beneath them, only then do they realize the structure had been weakening for months. That was the thought that carried me into Howard's office 2 weeks after Emily's last visit. Howard's office smelled of oak polish and old paper. He had been a legal mind in our county for nearly 4 decades, a man whose hair had gone from coal black to snow white, but whose sharpness had not dulled a fraction. "Tom," he greeted, shaking my hand with that steady grip of his. "Been too long. What brings you in?" I sat across from him, laying Margaret's blue folder on the desk. The weight of my decision felt heavier than any bundle of wires I'd carried in my life. "I need to update my will, Howard," I said simply. He gave a knowing smile. "That's never an easy errand, but it's wise. Tell me what you're looking to change." I leaned forward, voice calm but deliberate. "I don't want my estate passing quietly to Emily and her husband. I want to protect what Margaret and I built, not for them to squander, but for someone who will honor it, and I want it airtight." Howard adjusted his glasses. "That will upset your daughter deeply, Tom." I exhaled slowly. "It'll upset her more than that, Howard, but it's the only way to remind her that a father's worth isn't measured by how disposable he seems in public." Together, we worked out something different from a simple will. I created a trust, something not whispered about in wedding banquets or toasted over champagne, but powerful nonetheless. The house, the savings, the few remaining bonds, everything I owned went into that trust. But here was the detail that sharpened the edge of the blade. The beneficiary would no longer be Emily directly. Instead, it would be my late brother's son, my nephew, a quiet, responsible man who had never asked me for a dime but always showed me respect. A man who once drove 3 hours just to help me fix a leaking roof after Margaret passed, without gifts, without expectations. "Are you certain, Tom?" Howard asked, pen hovering. "I am," I said firmly. "But leave in one condition. I want Emily to receive something, small, enough to know I thought of her, but not enough to continue her husband's greed." Howard's brow furrowed. "How much?" I thought carefully. Finally, I replied, $1 single. Leave her $1. That way no one can claim she was forgotten. It will be clear she was excluded intentionally. Howard gave a low whistle. That will sting. Good. My voice came out like steel. It should. And then, as ink touched paper and the clauses were stamped with formality, I felt a strange calm wash over me. It wasn't joy. It wasn't even relief. It was control, something I hadn't felt since Margaret's illness. A week later, while walking through the marketplace, I spotted an antique shop. Dust coated the window glass, but in the display stood old wooden chests, worn typewriters, and jewelry boxes. For some reason, I stepped inside. The scent hit me first, aged wood mixed with traces of cedar and mothballs. I asked the shopkeeper if he could refurbish silver pieces. He nodded, leading me to a craftsman who polished the box to its old brilliance. As I held it, shining once more, I thought, if Emily cannot value what's inside, she will at least never forget what she threw away. I placed inside the notarized copy of my new will and sealed it shut again. The box had once carried Margaret's locket. Now it carried something far heavier. The document that would outlive both insults and apologies. Days later, Emily invited me for dinner, likely Charles's idea, to test whether I had bent to their pressure. I remember sitting across the table in their new apartment. The furniture was modern, sleek, sterile, no warmth, no memory, just glass, steel, and cold colors. Emily served salmon, her cooking polite but flavorless, her smile tight. Charles raised his glass to me. Mr. Hayes, I trust things are in order now, paperwork and all that. His smugness was thinly veiled, but I played my part like any seasoned actor. Yes, I said, sipping water slowly. Things are in perfect order. The way his eyes lit up, the twitch of relief in his jaw, it was almost too sweet. I let him believe, and Emily, poor Emily, smiled faintly, thinking her dutiful husband had secured our future. If only she knew what I had signed. That night, walking home under the glow of lamplight, I felt the first spark of victory. They had humiliated me publicly. But in silence, in ink and paper, I had struck the first blow back. I thought of Margaret as I walked, whispering as if she walked beside me. I kept my promise, Maggie. Our daughter has chosen her path, but I will not let her tarnish ours. The breeze carried a faint smell of lilacs from a neighbor's yard, Margaret's favorite flower. I took it as a sign. For the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully. Do not mistake this. Forgiveness still lingered somewhere, deep inside me, small and aching. I wished Emily would call me, tearfully admit the mistake. I longed to hear her say, "Dad, I was wrong." But silence grew instead. Days passed, weeks, and when the silence stretched too far, something inside me solidified permanently. I knew now, there would be no mending, only consequence. They had banked on my weakness. They had mistaken love for surrender, kindness for frailty. But I was not frail, not then, not ever. And this turning point was only the beginning. What Emily and Charles didn't know was that my final gift to them, hidden until the day the truth would surface, would shatter the picture-perfect life they thought they had secured. For months after the wedding, my life returned to its quiet rhythm, morning coffee, trips to the market, evenings in my armchair. Outwardly, it seemed as though I had faded quietly into the margins, exactly how Emily and Charles wanted. But beneath the silence, threads were already being woven into a net stronger than either of them could imagine. Emily occasionally sent me obligatory texts. "Hope you're well, Dad," followed by nothing more, short, polite, and empty. Charles, on the other hand, didn't bother with pretenses. He had no interest in me except for what papers I might sign. And so, I stayed quiet. I let time pass. I let them relax, believing they'd tamed the old man. What they didn't know was that every ignored visit, every forgotten call, every cold glance only sharpened my patience. Because revenge ripens with time, like fruit left on the vine, bitter when unready, sweet when it falls into one's hand at the perfect moment. Word of my health began to travel, partly true, partly embellished by whispers of neighbors. At 72, I was slowing down, my knees stiff in the mornings, my breath shorter after climbing stairs. Of course, Emily and Charles suddenly found reasons to check in. One evening, the doorbell rang, and there they were, both smiling that careful smile people wear when death hovers on the horizon. Emily fussed over me. "How are you eating, Dad? Have you thought about in-home care?" And Charles walked from room to room as if surveying property up for auction. I said little, only, "Things are in order, don't worry about me." Charles's eyes gleamed at those words. He thought "in order" meant his grip on my estate had been secured. He had no idea those very words meant the opposite. It was nearly a year after their wedding when I decided the time had come. The date was Emily's birthday. I called her, my voice even, asking, "Would you and Charles stop by this weekend? I have a gift for you, something important." Her tone softened just slightly. "Of course, Dad. That's thoughtful of you." Saturday came. They arrived in their immaculate car, stepping into my modest home as though stepping onto foreign soil. Emily hugged me stiffly. Charles shook my hand, already scanning the room. Again. I brought out the polished silver box. Its gleam caught the light from the window, casting reflections across the walls. "Emily," I said, placing it gently before her, "this is for you and for Charles. Something I've been saving." Her eyes widened, not with sentiment, but with expectation. She likely imagined it contained savings bonds, gold, or her mother's heirlooms. Slowly, with Charles leaning close, she opened it. Inside was not jewelry, not money, but a sealed envelope stamped by Howard's office. "The will?" Charles asked eagerly, snatching it up before Emily could. "Yes," I said calmly, sipping my tea. "A copy. The original is safe, of course, but I wanted you to see what's waiting." Charles tore open the envelope, unfolding the heavy cream-colored pages. Emily leaned over his shoulder. Their eyes darted hungrily across the lines until they froze. Her lips parted slightly. His jaw clenched. $1? Emily whispered. "Yes," I replied softly. "To you, my only daughter, I leave exactly $1. To my nephew, who has shown me kindness, respect, and loyalty, I leave the rest, including this house, the savings, and Margaret's heirlooms." The room went dead silent, save for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock. Emily's face drained of color. "Dad, this has to be some mistake." "No mistake," I said, smoother than I imagined my voice could be. "You weren't forgotten. I made certain the will acknowledges you, but it also makes clear that being my daughter isn't a blank check." Her eyes shone with tears, but even then, Charles stepped in before she could speak. He slammed the papers onto the table. "This won't hold up. She's your only child. Any court would see this for what it is. Spite." "Not true," I countered, my tone even. "Howard has ensured it's airtight. The single-dollar clause confirms deliberate choice, preventing any contest on grounds of oversight. It will stand." Emily sat back, trembling. "But why, Dad? After everything?" I leaned forward. "After everything? Emily, I was asked to leave your wedding, humiliated, erased, because you were afraid of being embarrassed by the very man who raised you, and I stayed silent. I gave you time, but you never came back. You never once asked me what I needed. All you wanted was what I had." Her tears spilled freely then, but Charles remained stone-faced, jaw tight. "This is wrong," he hissed finally. "You'll regret this." I smiled, sad but resolute. "Maybe. But at least when I'm gone, I'll rest knowing my legacy isn't squandered on a man who called my wife's locket a relic." Charles's eyes flickered. I knew then that I'd struck deeper than the will itself. Days later, Emily tried calling. Messages, long explanations, pleading words. "Dad, I didn't mean it. Charles misunderstood. We were under stress." But where was that apology when I sat outside her wedding hall, unwanted? Where was it when they pressed me about signing over the house? Where was her voice when Charles treated me like an obstacle instead of her father? I answered once calmly, "Emily, I will always love you, but love doesn't mean blindness. This is final." The phone went silent for days. Soon afterward, word traveled through family circles. My nephew called in shock, then in gratitude. Distant relatives, long absent from gatherings, sent quiet notes of respect. And Charles's family? They bristled with indignation, no doubt furious that their son had failed to secure the old man's treasure chest. Months later, I walked the garden one chilly evening, the air rich with damp earth and autumn leaves. My knees ached, my breath fogged before me, but my heart was lighter than it had been in years. Justice doesn't always wear the face of police officers or judges. Sometimes it is simply a man refusing to be diminished. Sometimes it is choosing dignity over desperation, memory over convenience. Margaret's photograph still stood on the mantel. I often spoke to it, telling her each step, how Emily tried, how Charles fumed, how I finally found peace through ink and law rather than anger and shouting. "You were right, Maggie," I whispered. "Money comes and goes, but respect is forever, and now she'll never forget what respect means." One last time Emily visited, without Charles. She stood on my porch, eyes red, her voice trembling. "Dad, was it really so easy to cut me out?" I touched her cheek, frail fingers against softer skin. "Emily, I never cut you out. You left me behind long before I signed a single paper. All I did was put it in writing." She sobbed quietly, and for a brief second, I saw the little girl who once clutched my hand in the night. But then she left, shoulders shaking, and I knew she would carry that lesson the rest of her days. And so, while they still drove their shining cars and hosted their dinner parties, a shadow followed them. The knowledge that all their airs, all their efforts, all their cold words had left them with nothing but a single dollar and regret. That was my justice. Not anger, not outbursts. Just a single, unforgettable gift. Aftermath. Now that my revenge was complete, the silence afterward forced me to reckon with something even deeper. The painful truth that winning didn't erase the loss of a daughter. The weeks after revealing my will were the quietest I had known in years. Not because silence in itself was new to me, it had filled every room of this house since Margaret passed, but because now silence carried weight. It was the hush of consequence, the stillness after a storm, the kind of silence where you can hear only yourself breathe and wonder whether you did right. Word travels fast in small towns. People who used to glance past me in the market now looked a little too long, some with pity, others with understanding, even admiration. I'd hear whispers as I picked up fruit or stood in line for bread. "He cut his daughter out, left her with just $1. Well, that's one way to make a point." Served her right, treating him like that. Every word struck differently. Sometimes I felt vindicated. Yes, it had served her right. Other times, I felt exposed, like my private wound had been turned into village gossip. It made me walk slower, shoulders heavier, as if bearing both victory and shame in the same bag. Emily stopped coming around. For months, she avoided me entirely. No calls, no texts, just silence. If I'm honest, I thought the silence would soothe me, that after years of her distance, I would finally be free. But freedom was a strange bedfellow late at night. Without her voice, even her coldest one, the house echoed doubly empty. Eventually, though, she wrote me a letter. Her handwriting was rushed, uneven, so unlike the neat cursive she once practiced at the kitchen table with Margaret. The letter was full of anger in the first half, pleading in the second. "Dad, I don't understand how you could humiliate me like this. How could you let the world think I abandoned you? I was just trying to build my own life. Charles said you would always be bitter about it. I don't want your money, but the way you did it, $1, it feels cruel." I read it twice, then set it down carefully. For a moment, something in me wanted to cave, to take it back, to reassure her like I did when she was 5, when storms clattered against her window and she cried out for me. But then, I remembered the whispers outside her wedding doors, her words, "He doesn't fit with the life Charles and I are building." Number cruelty had not started with me. Sometimes I spoke to Margaret's photograph more than to any living person. "I did what I promised you," I said one evening, the clock ticking steadily behind me. "I took care of Emily, even if she doesn't know it, because this way, she will remember that love isn't measured in what we give away. It's measured by whether we can stand tall, even when those we love push us down." In the firelight, her framed smile seemed less lonely, as if she agreed. But still, the ache lingered. You cannot cut out a part of yourself without bleeding. My nephew, Michael, visited not long after he received the official notice from Howard. He was humble, overwhelmed, insisting he never wanted or expected this. "Uncle Tom," he said quietly, his hands shaking as he held my own, "I'll cherish everything. I'll keep it exactly as you left it. You'll never have to worry about it falling into the wrong hands." His words gave me more peace than he will ever know. For here stood a man who asked for nothing, yet valued everything. That alone justified my choice. Emily may not see the lesson today. Maybe not tomorrow, not even years from now. But Michael's respect proved I wasn't mad or petty. I had simply chosen someone who understood the weight of legacy. People think justice feels like triumph, that it's fireworks or gavel strikes or applause. But for me, justice felt quieter. It felt like mornings when I woke without dread, like evenings where I poured a glass of whiskey and knew, not hoped, not wished, but knew. My life's work was safe. Justice doesn't erase pain. It doesn't give back laughter at the dinner table or the small hand of a child clutching yours during thunderstorms. It only balances the scales enough to let you stand without bending. Was it worth it? Some nights I say yes, some nights no. But every night I know this. I refuse to be erased. One Sunday, I walked past the church where Emily married. A new wedding was taking place. I stood across the street, listening to the organ swell, watching the bride laugh with her father as he straightened her veil. For a moment, envy twisted inside me. That should have been me once upon a time. Then I caught myself. No, it was me years ago when Emily was still small, when she ran toward me with arms wide open. Those memories are mine, and no wedding hall rejection can erase them. That's the lesson I want Emily to remember. That respect for where you come from is not optional. It's the foundation beneath everything new. Ignore it, and whatever you build wobbles. In the end, my revenge was never about money. It wasn't even about property. It was about memory, about reclaiming dignity stripped from me in public, about making sure my name, my role, my love, however flawed, would not vanish into silence. Yes, Emily may hate me for it. Yes, she may resent me until her hair turns gray. But someday, when Charles is gone, when her life quiets, when she opens old boxes in an attic, she'll find the locket. She'll see my handwriting. She'll realize she traded more than money that day. And maybe then, she'll understand. My gift wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. The aftermath is complete, but Part 8 should land the final poetic, haunting last line, leaving your YouTube viewers with goosebumps. I often think about funerals. Odd, isn't it? But when you reach my age, you begin to picture the day when people gather in quiet rooms, whisper your name, and measure your life in a handful of anecdotes. I know Emily will be there when my time comes. She will sit in the front row, dressed in somber black, perhaps holding Charles's hand. She will cry, not just because I am gone, but because her tears will be mixed with another burden, the weight of $1. That single dollar I left her will outlive both of us. Decades from now, when banknotes are redesigned, when accounts shift to numbers on screens, she'll still remember that crisp bill. She'll hold it in her hand, and in that moment, she will understand. It was never about money. It was about respect. And even if she refuses to admit it, that memory will bite harder than any inheritance could soothe. Sometimes, at night, I take out Margaret's old locket, polishing it gently with a cloth. Inside, her picture smiles back at me, as fresh and patient as the day we wed. On the mantel, beside her, stands Emily's graduation photo. The two frames face side by side, the woman who stood by me through storms, and the girl who once clutched my arm for safety in the dark. Two halves of my life, one loyal to the very end, one lost to another path. I speak to them both now, my voice low in the hush of the house. Maggie, I kept my promise. She is taken care of, only not in the way she asked for. And Emily, maybe someday you'll remember why your mother loved me, why I never let go of you, not even when you tried to let go of me. The clock ticks gently, and I imagine somewhere that sound carries through time, like a reminder that our choices echo further than we think. People often talk about legacy as objects, houses, jewelry, money. But I've come to see it differently. Legacy is the story people tell once you're gone. This house still stands, wood older than me, nails rusted with history. And when I no longer walk its halls, my name will remain tied to its bricks. Not because of who inherited it, but because of the story. I left it with intention. I defended it with dignity. For Emily, the story will never be a fairy tale. It will sit in her memory like a thorn. The father who gave her life gave her only $1. And yet, there is poetry in that too. I am no villain. I am no hero either. I am simply a father who loved deeply, who gave freely, and who chose, at the very end, not to be forgotten. Perhaps someday Emily will sit with her own child, watching tiny fingers clutch hers in desperate trust. Maybe she'll remember me then, not as a cruel man, but as a father who taught her, though painfully, that love must be repaid with respect. And if she never remembers, then the house will, the walls will, the silver box will rest quietly in some attic, waiting for curious hands. My story will be carried forward by whispers, by lessons, by those who still believe dignity is worth more than diamonds. When my eyes finally close, I will not take anger with me, only peace, because I know I left behind a gift impossible to spend, impossible to forget. At my daughter's wedding, she told me to leave, so I left her a gift that will never stop following her, $1 and a lifetime of remembering why.